Learn how to think like a designer this season on Beads, Baubles and Jewels.
Beads, Baubles and Jewels has been brought to you in part by Beading Daily, your jewelry making resource for how-to projects, books, magazines, DVDs, events, and online learning. BeadingDaily.com. Beadalon, a manufacturer of flexible bead stringing wires, memory wire, artistic wire, stringing materials, innovative findings, and tools to help you fashion your own jewelry. Beadalon.com. Create your style with SWAROVSKI elements. eksuccessbrands.com/create your style with Swarovski elements. Halcraft, jewelry component manufacturer. Halcraft.com. Jewel School, a division of Jewelry Television. jtv.com/jewel school. TiaraCast, define your design with metal. TiaraCast.com.
Hi, I'm your host, Katie Hacker, and this season we're exploring the ways to think like a designer. Just what makes your favorite designer pieces look great, and how does the creative process apply to your projects? After all, when you make your own jewelry, you are the designer. And today is all about pops of color and the use of intriguing color palettes to create stylish jewelry. We begin with a wire-wrapped bangle bracelet. Take a look at these neon pearls. They really pack a punch. They're super bright and a great way to add some bright pops of color to your outfits. So this bangle is really simple, and to get started, all you need is a pre-made bangle. And just make sure that it fits your wrist and is a little bit roomy so that it will still fit when you do some wire wrapping. Now you would want to start out with about a yard of wire, but I'm just going to trim a little bit off here so that you can see how to get started. This is 22 gauge, and I'm using hematite color to match the bangle so the beads really pop once they're on. Now, I take the short tail and hold it in my non-dominant hand, so then coil it around with the long tail. And you just want to be careful not to work this wire too much because as you're working with it, you are work hardening it, which makes your bracelet nice and durable, but you want to make sure not to make it too bent while you're working with it. So I'll just string on an 8mm neon yellow, and you can see it's just going to lay right there. Now you could do the same technique with a plain bangle, and I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. So you coil this around a few times, and it doesn't have to be perfect or neat, because by the time you finish, it's going to be completely covered with beads and wire, and it has a really fun look, and it's supposed to be fun, so don't stress out about it. So now we're just going to wrap this wire around and keep coiling in the same direction. We'll add another bead, and you can establish a pattern as you go around, and we'll have the complete instructions for this on our website. But you can get the idea here. You're just going to alternate colors. And every so often you put in a larger bead to create some punctuation in your design. If you take a look at the finished one here, you can see the pattern start to come out. And you can see I have a lot of wire coiled in between here too. So this is a nice way to add some color to a store-bought accessory. Now take a look at this other bangle bracelet that I made. This one uses sparkly crystals. So you get very subdued colors with this type of color palette, or you can add, like you saw, the neon one is really bright. So you can use it a lot of different ways depending on your favorite colors and really make it your own. Now on the earrings, this is a simple way also to make some hoops completely yours, just adding pops of color. So I chose some fuchsia wire in a thinner gauge and then coiled it around and just added the beads more spaced. And you can of course do this to different types of things, different types of materials, anything that's a circular shape. So you could use chain link, you can also use plastic bangle bracelets, and this can punch up your style quite a lot. Now there I used black because, you know, black is my go-to color palette, but today we are going to talk about a lot of different colors. And up next on our show is our favorite seed bead designer, Leslie Rogalski, with her contemporary color palette of black and white. Then meet Molly Schaller for a coral bracelet. Dozens of dangles make this bracelet stand out from the crowd. Finally, Kate Richbourg creates a ruby tag pendant that combines colored stones with metalwork. So let's meet Leslie. I'm here with Leslie Rogalski, and today we're talking about color palettes. And Leslie, you are known for black and white.
I love black and white. I love to use black and white with other colors, like the necklace and earrings that I'm wearing.
It looks great.
Red, black and white and red, of course.
Yeah, it really gives it that pop.
And black and white is so sophisticated and really brings a level of classic and yet pizzazzy to the work. So today, we're going to work just in black and white.
Okay.
And I'm going to teach circular brick stitch.
Wonderful.
Around an existing ring. Now, I choose to use a rubber O-ring, but you can do circular brick stitch around all kinds of other ring-like jewelry components.
Great.
I'm working with matte white size 8 seed beads and 4mm crystal bicones. So the black and white is also played up with the matte and shiny.
Oh, that's great. It really brings in another element.
It does. And as another element, I'm also using white beading thread, which really shows up on the black ring that I'm using. So you can consider that as something else to bring in as a design detail.
Oh, yeah.
So here's how we start circular brick.
Okay.
I have this knotted on with just a half hitch, and I have 5 beads strung, my alternating black and white seed beads and crystals. And you're going to bring your needle through the ring, so you can see that that's through the ring. And now I'm coming up back through the white bead and the crystal because we're making this thicker ring. And you're going to pull your work.
Oh, okay.
Snug.
So you can see the white bead just goes sideways there at the top.
That's right. So we have a white and a crystal are the little stems, and then in between each stem is another white bead.
Okay, so it's kind of like spokes on a wheel.
Exactly.
Right, it looks
and you're
great.
just going to repeat that around, and ultimately it's going to look like this.
Okay, so you'll just make sure each time to pull it tight as you're working.
That's right. And something else to keep in mind, since you mentioned it, when you said spokes, they come straight out from the ring, so you want to watch your thread tension and make sure that you're not pulling those beads too out of position. So they're going to come...
Make sure they're all sticking straight out.
That's right. Straight out like spokes on a wheel. That's the perfect description. So you can see in this next piece that I have worked all the way around the wheel almost. And the reason that I stopped here is because here, if you're going to use your ring as a toggle, you're going to attach another piece of beadwork. And there are lots of ways to do this. You can attach your cuff or make a bail to make it into a pendant. I have stopped with a black bead because I want to make a herringbone cuff.
That looks great.
So here's what we do. You're going to be working the exact same way, you only are going to pick up a black bead.
One bead at a time.
That's right. So you're going to come around through the ring.
So you always want to make sure that your thread is laying across the top, coming through the back and going over the top.
That's right. That works visually for you so you can see, and you want to make sure that that bead is parallel to the one before it, and you're going to come back up through the bead, and again, pull that stitch straight out and snug up to the next bead, like that, to fill in the spot there. And you can see where I have filled in the spot and started, and I chose to work in herringbone. Nice black and white, the repeat.
Right.
So when you're doing designs, you can keep in mind the sky's the limit with the patterns you can do. There are also, now here's the toggle ring. You're going to need a toggle bar.
Oh, so you'll attach this to the other end of the bracelet and fit them together.
That's right. And there are a lot of ways to do that. There are a lot of stitches that you can create coming off of the toggle ring. In this piece here, I have actually completed a ring with other beads and started with flat right angle weave.
That looks so pretty.
Which works right off a finished ring. So as samples, I brought you 2 finished rings, and you can just imagine what kind of cuffs you can attach. You have all these beads here sticking out to work off of in herringbone or peyote. You can use square stitch. So really, like I said, the sky is the limit with the variations that you can do.
And these would make great pendants too. And I love the pop of color that you added with these turquoise.
Here I'm working with the turquoise, which is
beads.
another fabulous combination color for black and white, and they play with each other really well. You can see also that I worked with alternating 2 black and 2 white to spread out the design and really create a more graphic dramatic look.
Oh yeah, but you keep it cohesive by using these crystal rondelles the whole way around.
Exactly. Circular brick is such a diverse stitch. There's so many ways that you can use it. You can work around a center bead if you're not working around a ring. Of course, that's not going to make a toggle. But
Right. The toggle is a great way to finish off your beadwork. Thank you so much, Leslie. Can't wait to see more seed bead projects
have
with
fun.
you.
Thank you.
All right, and Molly Schaller is coming up next. I'm here with designer Molly Schaller. And Molly, you've brought us a beautiful bracelet today. This is so pretty.
Thank you.
I love the color palette you used. And we're talking about pops of color today.
This is one that was inspired by this piece here on the end. And I started working with the peaches and the whites. And once I got them all on there, I realized it needed the little bits of red and the little bits of aqua to really bring out the perfect colors.
And isn't it just like cooking where you kind of start with the basics and then you add a little sprinkle of this, little sprinkle of that?
It's just like the spices that give it a little kick.
Right, the red and turquoise really make it pop.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And this is a special piece. These are beautiful.
Thanks. These are actually sliders that I've used in a slightly different way as the kind of the foundation for the bracelet. I connected the chains to, I don't know if you can see them here, but these little loops on the underside of the connectors.
Right, so normally you would use that for a multi-strand necklace and
You could pass
the
wires.
couple of strands through there. But instead you're attaching chain with the jump ring.
Yep. And the other nice thing about these is they have this great kind of this V shape here, which works really well for attaching clasps.
Oh,
so the second set of loops isn't used for structure, they're just there. So what I thought I would start out by doing is to show you how I just open a jump ring. This one has a clasp on it already, so I'm ready, but I'm gonna...
And always, for people who haven't used jump rings, always turning it open with,
Yes.
to the side instead of pulling the ends together because they never really go back.
Yeah, it gets messy. And I just slid this on to the V portion of this. It takes a minute, but it fits really nicely. And then you can bend. This is a really strong jump ring. You can bend the two ends toward one another to create a really secure, there we go, a secure connector there. Then I'm going to use the same size of jump ring to attach the chains, which are the structure for the dangles and all of the really fun movement that happens in this bracelet. And I'm going to attach them to these two outer loops.
Okay, and are the chains about 6 inches-ish, would you say?
I actually used them a little bit shorter since these are significant, like...
Measure the overall size
Yeah,
of
measure
your
the overall
bracelet.
size. And if you wanted it longer or shorter, or if you wanted to be able to adjust it, you could actually add links of chain on one end so that you could connect
Oh,
at
that's a good
different
idea.
lengths. But I did use two lengths of chain to create this bracelet. So what I did first is I went ahead and I made a lot of dangles. And most of them are wrapped loops, but some of the small ones I knew that they aren't so heavy, so I just did a simple loop on them. And basically, the ones that look like hoops, the way you do that is you just start, let's find the hole, you start in the middle
Those
and
are
work
some
out.
of my favorites. You can use them as a bead frame or as a dangle.
Yep.
Now, everybody has a different technique for looping, so can you show us your wrapped loop?
Sure. What I do is I get my round nose pliers and I just bend it over my round nose pliers that way. And then I bring it back around, kind of do a little adjustment there. These little discs are kind of nice to give you a handle to hold on to. And then I wrap around, usually pull it tight with these if I want kind of a tidy loop.
Right, so that
And
gives
trim.
you a nice tight wrap.
Yes.
And then you created all of your dangles at once, and I always recommend people to do that too because you can do it in one sitting. You know,
Yeah.
create all of your pieces and then assemble it. So when you start attaching them, is there a rhyme and reason to how these are
I
on the chain?
decided to go with a relatively symmetrical look on this, but the way that I started was I kind of laid my chain out, and I like to attach just one end first, and then, let's scooch these back just a little bit, just sort of place the dangles along
So you
there.
start with the biggest elements.
Yeah, definitely start with the largest. And I kind of, instead of attaching them one at a time, I like to take a jump ring and attach little groupings so that it goes a little faster, and I like the clustered way that it looks too. So I would kind of, like grab a couple of those and put them in there. I like to kind of keep the smaller stuff near the edges and the bigger stuff in the center so that it's easier to connect and clasp the clasp. So I went along and just kind of, pop them in there as I went along. And then I'd take one of my jump rings, open it up, and just kind of like grab it.
Pick up your cluster of each.
Yeah, pick up the cluster and pop it on there.
And we'll have the complete instructions on our website, but is everything fairly evenly spaced?
It is. It's every other link has a group of dangles on it. And so I didn't do a lot of counting, but I did do spacing ahead of time like this.
Right, I love the colors. Let's take a look at this piece right here where you've attached all of your dangles. So we can see that you have some of your bigger elements and then your smaller clusters are groupings of different beads, right? So, and this is just one strand. So you're gonna make two of these. Now this would make a beautiful necklace too.
It would, just to attach like some
really pretty.
simple chain on the side.
This bracelet here in the front shows what it looks like with both chains. So you can see that it's actually two chains that are connected to the slider. And you could use any type of slider.
Yes, definitely.
And here's another color story over here. You have your mixed metallic colors. I love this one, and this is pretty with the hole where you can attach a couple of dangles.
Yeah, that was perfect for the attaching the clasp and also attaching a little extra something over there because the clasps are kind of small.
And is this one a slider also?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is. It had the 4 holes on the back, or the loops on the back as well.
And what about this one?
That one, I decided to try something that was just a monochromatic, and which is just as much of a statement when you're wearing it on your wrist, is something that's got colors all over the place. And the connectors on this has an couple extra sets of chains, but instead of using the loops underneath, I attached to each of these little flower, like kind of these little heart-shaped points on the edge of the connector. So you can really go off the shapes like this one. You could have connected things onto those little holes. But
right.
So
you're really
versatile.
using the shape of the connector or the shape of the slider and connecting things depending on that.
Yep.
These are some really beautiful ideas. And we have to see this bracelet one more time because the dozens of dangles really do make it pop and stand out. And we'll be talking a little bit more later this series about more is more. I think you've got it.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Molly. And we will be right back. I'm here with designer and author Kate Richbourg. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome. Today we're talking about adding color to your jewelry, and you have a great idea for adding color to metalwork.
That's right, with a stone.
All right.
And this is all about a little ruby that's going to add some color.
Oh, I can't wait to see.
Okay, so let's get started.
Okay.
All right. So first, what we're going to do to make the ruby tag pendant is we just need to cut out a little tag from some 20 gauge sterling silver metal. This is about 1 inch by a little more than 1/4 of an inch wide.
Okay.
And once we've cut it out, we want to go ahead and just smooth the edges so it's a nice, simple operation here. So they're just nice and smooth. For filing, we remember that we want to go in just one direction, and we want to go all the way around this pendant so everything's nice and clean so it doesn't snag on anything.
And you're using sterling, but you could use other jewelry making metals.
You sure could. Any metal for jewelry making will work for sure. Now, we're going to put this aside. We're going to revisit it in a moment, but we've got to prepare the bezel for the stone because we want to set that stone in a bezel. So what I do here is I've used some painter's tape, and the painter's tape really comes in handy. I just cut a little strip and I wrap it around that little ruby stone. Now the stone is small, it's a little fiddly, but with a little practice, you can do it. It's not that difficult. Then I'm going to take that piece of tape that I've measured around my stone, and I go ahead and I lay that on some bezel wire. Now the bezel wire is a lot thinner than this 20 gauge metal that I'm using. The bezel wire is about a 28 gauge, 26 gauge, just depends on what people like to use. But then I cut along my little tape line here until I have a nice little bezel.
Okay, and that's going to form the shape.
That's right. So I'm going to form that strip into a bezel using the round nose of my round nose plier.
Okay, now when you cut it, do you just use snips?
I do. I use some very fine wire cut or wire snips here, shears for cutting sheet,
Okay.
and it's just a nice straight line.
All right.
Okay.
So then you have your little cup formed.
I do, my little bezel here. And so now we're gonna fire things up, Katie.
All right.
So before we do that, I'm gonna hand you some safety glasses.
Yes.
I'm gonna hand me some safety glasses because we always wanna have safety first on this. Now, to prepare this bezel for soldering, since we're using wire solder, I need to go ahead first and use a little bit of flux, and I paint that flux right on the interior of my bezel, and that's going to allow the wire solder to flow. So once I've done that, and I already have some on there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the hard solder. And this is the wire solder here, and this is a nifty little trick. I have my little
You're very organized.
yeah, my
here.
little container here. So I've marked that with an H, so I know that that's where my hard solder lives.
Okay.
Now, for the wire solder, this is a special plier that I'm using to cut. And I just come in, get my wire solder, get it in that little hole, and I just cut some little pieces
So
of
then
the
it's
solder.
perfectly measured for what you need.
Exactly. So
Handy.
it's really simple. Now, we're getting close. We're
All
getting
right.
close to the soldering. I go ahead and I dip my solder pick into a little bit of water and dip it into the flux, and that allows me to really be able to pick up these little pieces of hard solder
yeah.
here. So it allows me to control it a little bit better. And I would just drop this little piece of solder right on the inside of the bezel, right at the seam. And I've already placed one right in there, so it is time.
It's ready to go.
Yeah, and I'm using that red pick because I am using the hard solder. So I'm using the red hot pick, and I use a different pick for each of my
type.
solders.
Okay.
Now this is a butane torch, and it's butane microtorch, very easy to use, very safe. We want to make sure that we're using this in a well-ventilated area, and you always want to have a fire extinguisher nearby. But
Okay.
other than that, it's
And you're
perfect for
working on
home
a
use.
kiln brick.
Exactly. The kiln brick is my solder surface of choice.
Okay.
All right, so let's fire this up. Now this bezel is going to go pretty quickly. So I'm just going to slowly introduce the flame of the torch into the bezel. And you can see the flux might be bubbling a little bit. And see how that already went? It just, before we could even see it, that little piece of solder has melted, and the solder goes follows the heat of the flame. So that solder is just going to go right along. And so we've soldered that little end, that little join closed. Now I very carefully, since this kiln brick surface is hot, pick this up with my tweezers and I quench it. So
Okay.
that's ready to go. So once we have cleaned that bezel, and you can pickle it.
Use some pickle or something similar.
Something similar. I go ahead and I have painted some flux onto the tag,
surface there.
the surface. I've placed my bezel where I want it to go, and then I've added 2 pieces of medium solder, and I'll just solder it the same way, since I'm using medium solder, since this is our second step.
Okay.
And I just solder it the same way with the torch as I did that bezel.
Okay. So
Okay.
that will look just the same.
Exactly.
Do you want to go ahead and show us?
Sure,
All
I'd
right.
love to.
I'll put my glasses back
All
on.
right, yeah, safety, safety first, as always. So I'm just going to make sure that my little solder is placed perfectly. And I'm going to go ahead and
And this will actually be attaching the bezel to the tag.
it is attaching the bezel to the tag. So what we want to do is, again, come in slowly when you start to heat a piece of metal with the solder on it. If you come in too quickly, the solder is just going to bounce and move around. That's not the end of the world. You could always nudge it back into place with your pick, but we want to avoid trying to do that. And see, as the solder turns glassy, see how it's kind of now glossy and gleaming? See that? My solder, it's kind of hard to see because it goes so quickly, but I'm moving my flame right around the bezel, and can you see how it looks like
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a
we
little
see it.
wet? Yeah.
Oh,
Doesn't it
definitely.
look great? And that is it. It is soldered.
There you go.
Yeah, we're working on such a small little piece of jewelry that, boom,
goes
it's done.
fast.
It does go fast. So now I'm going to pick this up and quench.
Quick.
All right. Now for our last trick. I'm
I'll
going
take
to
this one,
trade with
sure.
you here. We're going to put a little bail on the top of this tag. And I've cut this bail out of bead wire. And for ease of use, I'm actually using easy paste solder. And the paste solder already has flux in it, so I don't need to worry about fluxing.
So you don't use any flux there.
Yeah.
And so 3 different types of solder all in this one project.
Exactly, because we're using those different steps.
Yeah.
And with that easy paste solder, I've just used my cool blue pick to apply it. And you can see it's almost about the size of a size 11 seed bead. That's about the size of the solder that I've put in.
Yeah, okay, so how are you going to fit the stone in here?
Well, with the stone, what I'll do is I'll solder this on, and I'll go ahead and solder a little jump ring
so
on
that you have a hanger.
So we're ready. Then the trick with setting the stone is I use a little piece of dental floss, and I lay it across. And so I don't have to commit quite yet. I can just check and see if the stone fits in, and the dental floss prevents the stone from being permanently attached. But when I'm ready to permanently attach it, I'm just going to remove my dental floss, and either with your fingers or a little pair of pliers, I'm just going to add the stone right into the bezel, burnish the bezel right around so it cups that stone in, and if I want to antique it or polish it or whatever I want to do, but that's all she wrote.
Okay.
It's that easy.
And for burnishing, you just use your little burnishing tool?
Yeah, just a little burnishing tool. It can just be a nice, fine little tool, and that'll help you set it in.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the finished one. This is a
Okay.
beautiful project
Thank
and
you.
so wearable
Thank
too.
you.
Thank
Yes,
you, Kate.
my pleasure.
So do you already feel like a designer? Next week we feature bold central elements as we continue to think like a designer on beads, baubles, and jewels.
Instructions for today's projects, plus other ideas, techniques, and information are available on the web at beadsbaublesandjewels.com. Today's show is number 1701. If you enjoyed today's show and want to see more projects and great guests, you can order a DVD set of the entire Beads, Baubles and Jewels Series 1700. All 13 episodes plus bonus content featuring soldering techniques with Kate Richbourg and spiral herringbone with Jean Campbell, only available in this DVD set. Order at beadsbaublesandjewels.com for $29.99 plus shipping and handling. Don't miss a single episode and get these bonus projects. Beads, Baubles and Jewels has been brought to you in part by Beading Daily, your jewelry making resource for how-to projects, books, magazines, DVDs, events, and online learning. BeadingDaily.com. Beadalon, a manufacturer of flexible bead stringing wires, memory wire, artistic wire, stringing materials, innovative findings, and tools to help you fashion your own jewelry. Beadalon.com. Create your style with SWAROVSKI elements. eksuccessbrands.com/create your style with Swarovski elements. Halcraft, jewelry component manufacturer. Halcraft.com. Jewel School, a division of Jewelry Television. jtv.com/jewel school. TiaraCast, define your design with metal. TiaraCast.com.